I used to think I was the problem. I replayed every conversation, every holiday dinner, every moment where I might have said the wrong thing or held on too tight. Maybe I was too involved. Maybe I called too often. Maybe after my wife passed, I leaned on my daughter more than a father should. I told myself that for a long time. I believed it too. But nothing in 64 years of living prepared me for the afternoon. My daughter sat across from me at my own kitchen table, slid a folded piece of paper across the wood, and told me that her husband felt I was a disruptive presence in their home, that I was no longer welcome there, that it would be better for everyone, including my grandson, if I gave them some space. She couldn't look me in the eye when she said it. 3 weeks later, I received a bill for $175,000. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without context, and context is the only thing that kept me from falling apart completely. My wife, Carol, passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We had 38 years together, and I won't pretend those last 7 weeks weren't the longest of my life, or that the years since haven't had a particular kind of quiet that I've never fully gotten used to. But I had my daughter, and I had my grandson, Tyler, who was 3 years old when Carol passed and had her exact same laugh, this big, full-body thing that starts in his belly and takes over his whole face. When I heard that laugh, I felt like I could breathe again. My daughter, Melissa, is 31. She's sharp and kind and has her mother's stubbornness in the best possible way. She married her husband, Derek, 6 years ago. I walked her down the aisle myself. I paid for the rehearsal dinner. I gave a toast that made half the room cry. I meant every word. Derek works in finance. Worked, I should say. He's the kind of man who talks about money constantly but never seems to have enough of it. Not because he's generous, he's the opposite of generous. He talks about money the way some men talk about sports, like it's a scoreboard, like the number next to your name defines the kind of person you are. He drove a leased BMW he couldn't afford, wore a watch that cost more than my first car, and had an opinion about everything: real estate markets, stock portfolios, the right neighborhoods to raise children in. He gave advice freely to everyone except himself. In the early years, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not a difficult man. I spent 30 years as a contractor, built things with my hands, and learned early that the job gets done faster when you keep your mouth shut and work. I applied the same philosophy to Derek. He wasn't my first choice for my daughter, but she loved him, and he seemed to make her happy, and that was enough. Then, Tyler was born, and something shifted. Watching Derek with Tyler was like watching a man hold a prop. He was attentive when other people were watching and distracted when they weren't. Tyler figured that out before he could fully articulate it. Kids always do. When Tyler scraped his knee at the park, he ran to me, not to his father. Derek noticed, and Derek did not like it. The comments started small. I was spoiling Tyler by bringing him books every Sunday. I was overstepping when I took him to his first baseball game without clearing it with Derek first, even though Melissa had said it was fine. I was making it harder for Derek to establish authority as a father by being too present, too available, too everything. Every few months, there was a new complaint, always delivered by Melissa with the uncomfortable look of someone reading from a script they didn't write themselves. I listened. I adjusted. I called before I came over. I brought fewer gifts. I waited to be invited instead of showing up. I bent every way a man can bend, and it was never quite enough. About 14 months ago, I noticed things starting to change in a different way. Derek had always been tightly wound, but there was a new tension in him, the specific tension of a man keeping a secret. He stopped talking about work at family dinners. He'd always been the type to announce his bonuses like sports scores, so the silence was its own kind of statement. Melissa seemed distracted in a way I recognized from when Carol first got sick, that look of someone running calculations in the background of every conversation. I didn't push. I'm not a pusher, but I paid attention. Then came that Sunday in March. I had plans to take Tyler to the Science Museum. He'd been talking about the new dinosaur exhibit for weeks, sending me voice messages through Melissa's phone, this 7-year-old narrating the Cretaceous period with the confidence of a tenured professor. I was already in the car when Melissa called and asked if I could come inside first, just for a few minutes. I sat at my own kitchen table. I should say I sat at their kitchen table, The one I helped them move in 4 years ago, and my daughter told me that Derek felt it was best if I gave them some space. That Tyler was going through an adjustment period. That family boundaries were important. That she hoped I understood. I asked if Tyler was okay. She said he was fine. Just adjusting. I asked what he was adjusting to. She looked at the table. I drove home without going to the museum. I sat in my kitchen for about 2 hours, without turning on any lights. Carol's reading glasses were still on the shelf by the window. I'd never moved them. I looked at them for a long time. That was a Thursday. 22 days later, Melissa came to my door alone. She had a manila envelope. She set it on my counter. Said Derek had put together a proposal. Said she hoped I'd look at it with an open mind. Said it was really an investment opportunity when you thought about it the right way. Then she left. I stood at my counter and opened the envelope. It was typed. 3 pages. At the top, it said Raymond Family Investment Proposal. Underneath that, in a chart with tidy little boxes, was an itemized list. Down payment on a new home in Naperville, $95,000. Kitchen and basement renovation, $45,000. Startup capital for Derek's new consulting firm, $35,000. Total, $175,000. At the bottom, a single handwritten line, in Derek's slanted script. Think of it as investing in your family's future. I read it twice. Then I folded it, put it back in the envelope, and set the envelope on the counter next to Carol's reading glasses. I called my oldest friend, a man named Bill, who spent 30 years as a CPA before he retired to Arizona and who has known me since we were 22. I read him the letter over the phone. There was a long pause on his end. "Ray," he said. "I know," I said. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm going to find out exactly what I'm dealing with first. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vengeful person. I don't have a dramatic bone in my body, and I have no interest in spectacle. What I did over the next 6 weeks, I did quietly, methodically, the same way I've approached every difficult job in my life. You assess the structure before you start swinging a hammer. You find out what's load-bearing and what isn't. You don't tear down a wall until you know what's behind it. I started with what I could see. I thought about the things that hadn't added up: Derek's silence about work, the new tension in the house, Melissa's distracted look. I thought about a conversation I'd had with Melissa's neighbor, a retired school teacher who mentioned in passing that she rarely saw Derek leave the house in the mornings anymore. I thought about a birthday dinner 2 months earlier where Derek had made a point of saying his credit cards were all maxed out for the month as a joke, except nobody laughed, and Melissa's smile had been the careful kind. Bill flew in from Arizona. He has a way of pulling on threads without making it look like pulling, and within 2 weeks, he had a fairly clear picture. Not through anything illegal, public records, a few careful conversations, the kind of forensic patience that 30 years of accounting teaches you. Derek had been terminated from his position 8 months earlier. Not downsized, terminated. The circumstances weren't entirely clear, but they weren't good. For 8 months, he had been telling Melissa he was transitioning to independent consulting, working from home, building something new. There was no consulting firm. There was a business license filed 2 months ago, $300, paid on a credit card, and a website with no clients listed under the heading Case Studies. There were 4 credit cards in Derek's name carrying a combined balance just over $61,000. There was a personal loan taken out 11 months ago. And then Bill found something that made me sit down. A loan application submitted 6 months ago to a local bank, using a joint account that Melissa didn't appear to know was joint. The application had been denied, but the attempt was there in the records. My daughter was living with a man who had been financially drowning for the better part of a year, and he had not told her. I took several days with that. I want to be honest about what those days felt like, because this is not a story about a father who is always right. I thought about every way I might be wrong. I thought about whether I was interpreting this out of my own bias against Derek, my own grief over being pushed away from Tyler, my own need to feel justified. I ran it through that filter hard, but the numbers didn't care about my feelings. The numbers were simply true. I called my attorney. Her name is Sandra, and she is the kind of woman who speaks in complete sentences and doesn't waste a single word. I explained the situation. I told her I had a grandson I intended to protect regardless of what happened between the adults. I told her I wanted to set up an irrevocable education trust for Tyler, funded, locked, directed to him alone, accessible for education and medical needs and nothing else. Not passing through Melissa, not touchable by Derek, not part of any future financial negotiations. She had it drafted within the week. I funded it with $200,000 from an account Carol and I had kept separate for exactly this kind of purpose, the quiet kind of emergency that doesn't announce itself until it's already happening. Then I called Melissa and told her I'd been thinking about the proposal. I said I wanted to sit down and talk through it with her and Derek together. I told her I wanted to do this properly, like adults, at my house, on a Sunday. She sounded relieved. She said Derek would be glad to hear that. They arrived at noon. Derek had a yellow legal pad. He was dressed like it was a business meeting, which I supposed it was, and he had the particular energy of a man who had already written the outcome in his head. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and immediately started explaining the proposal as though I hadn't already read it 3 times. I let him talk for a few minutes. I didn't interrupt. I listened to him explain the Naperville neighborhood, the square footage, the school district ratings, the conservative projections for his consulting firm, the tax advantages of a parent's investment. He was good at this part, the presentation, the confidence, the vocabulary. He had a way of making spending money sound like saving it. When he finished, I nodded slowly. Then I opened my folder. I want to say something about what happened next, because I've thought about it often since. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt the particular calm that comes when you've been braced for something for a long time and it finally arrives. I felt like a man who has spotted a crack in a foundation and known for weeks that he'd eventually have to show someone else what he was seeing. I slid the first page across the table to Melissa. It was a printed summary, employment records, termination date, 8 months of no verifiable income. I need you to look at this, I said. I said it to her, not to Derek. The color left her face in stages. Derek's voice came up fast. He said this was private. He said I had no right. He said whatever I'd dug up was taken out of context, that I didn't understand the consulting business, that he'd been building something and it took time. And this was exactly the kind of small-minded thinking that I put the second page on the table. The credit card balances. Derek stopped talking. I put the third page on the table. The loan application. The joint account Melissa didn't know about. Melissa picked up that page. She held it for a long time. She looked at Derek. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said the account had been a misunderstanding, that he'd meant to tell her, that things had been complicated and stressful, and she didn't fully understand the pressure he'd been under. And if she'd given him more support, maybe he would have handled things differently. And, "Stop," Melissa said. Her voice was quiet. So quiet I almost didn't hear it. But Derek stopped. She set the paper down carefully, the way you set down something fragile. She looked at it for another moment. Then she looked at me. "How long have you known?" she said. 6 weeks, I said. I needed to be certain before I said anything. She nodded. She pressed her lips together. I recognized that expression Carol used to make it when she was holding herself together through sheer effort of will. I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Pure, helpless love for my daughter, and pure sorrow that I was the one sitting across from her in this moment. Derek pushed his chair back. He said this was ambush. He said I had always hated him. He said I'd been waiting for a chance to interfere and I'd finally gotten my opening, and he hoped I was satisfied. He said some other things that I won't repeat, not because they hurt me, but because they belonged to him and not to this story. Then he picked up his yellow legal pad and he left. The front door didn't slam, he closed it carefully, which for some reason was worse. Melissa sat at my kitchen table and didn't move for a while. I got up and made coffee. I didn't ask if she wanted any. I just made it and put a cup in front of her and sat back down. We sat there in the quiet of my kitchen, and outside the neighbors' kids were playing in the yard, and somewhere down the street someone was running a lawnmower. Eventually, she said, "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong." "I know," I said. "I should have pushed harder." "You trusted your husband," I said. "That's not a character flaw." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "What do I do now?" "That's not something I can answer," I said. but I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm not going anywhere. I was never going anywhere. I just needed you to see what I was seeing." She started to cry then, the kind of crying that's been building for a long time, not sharp and sudden but slow and exhausted, like something that's been held at pressure finally releasing. I moved my chair around the table and sat next to her, and she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her, and I didn't say anything at all for a long time. There was no version of this moment that felt like winning. In the weeks that followed, things moved, the way difficult things move slowly, then all at once. Melissa hired an attorney. Derek had left the house by the end of the month. The conversations that followed were not easy, and I won't pretend they were, because Melissa loved him, or had loved the version of him she believed existed, and losing that version is its own kind of grief, even when the real version turns out to be a lie. She moved back into her childhood bedroom for 2 months. I slept better those 2 months than I had in over a year. Not because I felt righteous about any of it, I didn't, but because I could hear her and Tyler moving around in the house in the mornings. I could hear Tyler talking to his action figures in the hallway. I could smell her coffee. Tyler asked me one morning, about 3 weeks in, why he was sleeping in Mommy's old room. I told him that sometimes grown-ups needed to sort things out, and that it had nothing to do with him, and that he was loved by more people than he could count. He thought about that for a second and then said, "Grandpa, do you think the T-Rex had good eyesight?" "I honestly don't know," I said. "I think it probably did," he said. "Because how else would it see stuff?" "That's a very solid point," I said. He nodded seriously and went back to his cereal. I have thought many times about the $175,000 proposal. About Derek sitting across from me with his legal pad, confident that I would write a check because I had always written the check, because I was the kind of father and grandfather who put family first and swallowed whatever it cost him. He was not entirely wrong about my history. I had written a lot of checks over the years without asking too many questions. Maybe that was my part in how we arrived here, not the whole part. But a part, what Derek miscalculated was this. There is a difference between a man who says yes because he is weak and a man who says yes because he is patient. I had been patient for a long time. I had watched and waited and absorbed things I shouldn't have absorbed because I believed the relationship was worth protecting. What I learned is that you cannot protect a relationship with someone who is only using it as cover. The trust I set up for Tyler is still there. It will be there when he turns 18, when he picks a college, when he figures out who he wants to be in the world. He doesn't know it exists yet. I'm in no hurry to tell him. There's time for that. There's time for a lot of things. Melissa is doing better than I would have expected, which tells me she's stronger than she knew. She's back in her own apartment now, a good one, 15 minutes from my house. She has a job she likes and friends who showed up for her and a lawyer who is worth every dollar. She calls me most evenings, not because she needs something, just to talk. Last Tuesday, she called to tell me about a documentary she'd watched about deep-sea fish, and we talked for 45 minutes about things that live at the bottom of the ocean. It was one of the best conversations I've had in years. On Sunday mornings, Tyler comes over. I make pancakes with blueberries, and he sits on the counter stool that wobbles slightly on the left side, and he talks about whatever is occupying his mind that week: dinosaurs, space, whether or not ants have feelings, the structural integrity of Lego castles. He talks and I listen and I flip pancakes, and sometimes I think about Carol, about how much she would have loved this kid, about how she would have sat right where I'm standing and laughed her head off at the things he comes up with. That laugh. He really does have her laugh. I kept the proposal. It's in the same manila envelope, in the back of my desk drawer. I don't look at it often, but sometimes, when I need to remember what it felt like to be completely, absolutely certain that I was doing the right thing, I take it out and unfold it and read Derek's handwriting at the bottom. Think of it as investing in your family's future. I did invest in my family's future, just not the way he meant. I lost a son-in-law I never really had. I gained 2 months of my daughter sleeping down the hall, and a 7-year-old who leaves dinosaur drawings on my refrigerator with the magnet shaped like a lobster that Carol bought at a farmer's market in Maine 20 years ago. I did the math. I came out ahead. If there is anything I have learned from all of this, and I am 64 years old and still learning, which I suppose is the point, it is this. The people who love you do not hand you a bill. They do not put a dollar figure on your seat at the table or calculate the return on your presents at Christmas. Love does not come in an envelope with a chart. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not talking about love. They are talking about leverage. Know the difference. Protect your people, build the trust, and make the pancakes. Always make the pancakes.